everybody, and welcome to another exciting, fun-filled, expeditious episode of Radiorama, where, as the name implies, I show you how to work on radios, mostly. Occasionally a TV set or a stereo. Actually, stereos come by pretty frequently, if you guys that have stuck with my sloppy channel know. And today is a radio, and today we have an RCA Victor large tabletop radio. And for those of you that collect radios, you're probably rolling your eyes because we've all seen like exactly 10,000 million billion of this radio. This one's a little unusual. I don't think I've ever seen one in this color. It is a model 9X-57 something or another obscured. It's a typical 5-tube set we have. Let's see, 50L6 for the output, 35Z5 for the rectifier. There's a triode 12SQ7, and then 12SA7 and 12SK7 for our IF tubes. And I don't know if it works or not. It was donated to us about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I knew this sticker would be in the back because I've worked on this model many times. And it is to say, this is to certify that this instrument has the acoustical balance which produces the tone of the Golden Throat by D.D. Cole, who's the Chief Engineer, Home Instrument Department of RCA Victor. So, when I was looking underneath, I thought, maybe someone painted this, but I don't think so, because the back is also this cream color. Clearly no one's masked this off. It's got the glue that they slapped on there for the sticker. You can see there's a tiny bit of overspray on the inside. And it just has this worn patina to it. And also you've got this strange, like, this is a photo finish stickers to emulate fake wood, like blonde wood. And blonde was a pretty popular finish back in the early 50s, which is when I think this was probably made, because it doesn't have any civil defense markings. Now, turn these guys on. You start by clicking this over, and I think the first setting is AM radio. I don't recommend you do this on sets with power transformers, because if there's a short, you'll short the power transformer, and that's very costly and difficult to replace. On sets like these, if something really haywire goes bad, you'll snap the little quarter-watt resistor.
At Bloomberg, reporters like me dig into the context of the story so you understand how it impacts you. Because context changes how you see.
It seems like it is working. It's not very loud though. Could just be dirty contacts, or maybe the phono switch is sticky. It doesn't have a phono switch. The switch is here. Alright, the contacts are dirty. I'm not going to play it much more because I'm not sure what the status is as far as the electronics goes, whether it's original or if what I usually find on these guys is that the electrolytic capacitors, which are the weakest part, at some point get replaced within a few decades of the set's use. Let's pause and think about that for just a minute. So these days, if you go out and buy a flat screen TV and something happens with it, you throw it in the garbage, because by the time something happens, usually it's about 3 years old. And the cost of getting the replacement board, because the components on these things are so tiny, you can't really replace things. The cost of the board is more than the set costs, you know, if you bought a new one, because they're so cheap. These sets, on the other hand, these were expensive, super expensive, because electronics back then were more or less made by hand. They had an assembly line, but you had like a bunch of people sitting there soldering little components in, up and down the set. You know, there was no automation. There's just a belt with parts moving down the assembly line. That was expensive. And plus, back then we had unions, and people had actually, you can make a good living putting radios together. And so they were so expensive that people would make sure and keep them in service for a really long time. It makes me wonder if we were more ecologically friendly when it comes to consumer goods back then than we are now. I mean, back then, obviously, they had leaded gasoline and Freon and asbestos and all that other lovely stuff and PCBs. But at least they kept. There's a moth. Get out of here. Eat my wool shirt. So let's go ahead and take the back off and take a looky-loo inside. See how much dust is in there. Because if there's a shit ton of dust, that tells me it's not been worked on in a long time, if ever. Alright, well here is the back removed. There's 4 screws that holds it on. And it sure looks like nothing's been done in here in a very long time. These tubes are very tight in their sockets, and they're all RCA tubes. So I wonder if this has never been worked on. It's all like factory original. Depends on how much a set was used. A lot of people that don't know anything about radios will say stuff like, aren't you worried about the tubes? Like, where do you get tubes when they go bad? And I just tell them, tubes actually stay good for a very long time. I've got the stereo that you're hearing in the background, I've had in this garage for 12 years. And prior to that, it was guts out of a console that someone had gutted. I mean, I know some people feel not so great about that, but anyway, just the same. It's been in my garage for 12 years. I use it every single day of the week for hours on end, and it was used for decades before that. And none of the tubes have gone bad. Actually, I take that back. The rectifier went bad, but still, good track record. What I do like about this is that it appears that instead of having to remove these little flimsy clips on the speakers, they have this RCA jack. So it's a lot easier to deal with. So let me take the knobs off and take the screws out of the bottom and take a look underneath and see just what is and isn't original. If it's all original, that's pretty amazing, considering it's pushing 75 years old. Alright, well, I took it out and flipped it over, and the only component that's been replaced on it is the cord. You can tell because someone they electrical taped it in. Because I know the cord on this kind of goes at its weird, torturous route. It goes here, then up and over into this switch. And it's not easy to get at, so if you're not proficient with electronics, I can understand why you would do that. But nothing else has been replaced in this thing. I've only seen these weird tinted red wax caps in a few RCA products from, it seems like about a year or two. Nothing else. They're all Aerovox capacitors, so I guess RCA made a deal with Aerovox. That doesn't look like an Aerovox, it looks like something else. It's a mica mold. That's remarkable if you think about it. This thing is 75 years old and it still works with all the original components. You can't say that thing. You can't say that with modern electronics. In fact, now that 80s electronics are starting to become collectible, what a lot of people are finding is that the small E caps in the boards are rupturing, and they'll just like corrode and ruin the board, and there's nothing you can do about it. Like all the Macintosh computers from the 80s, like the Mac Classics, like most of them have leaky capacitors that ruin the boards. There's not much you can do about it, but these are fine. The most important capacitor in this whole set when it comes to safe operations is this guy. So I've mentioned this many times on this channel, which is American companies devised what are known as the hot chassis sets, which is the elimination of a power transformer and instead stringing all the filaments of the tubes together to get 120 volts, like an old, well, 110 volts back then. It's kind of like old Christmas lights. All the filaments are strung together, and even back then they knew that it was stupid if you were to run one end of that to the metal chassis. Some of them did that, and some of them are safe because they're physically isolated, like a lot of 50s Zenith radios that are AM and FM do that. Some of them not so much. This one is a floating ground. The ground is going through that capacitor, except that's 1/10 of a microfarad, which is about 10 times higher in capacitance than it should be. Now, back then they didn't understand how little it takes to cause a heart to fibrillate. And so if you had a heart condition and you were to touch chassis and ground at the same time, it could cause your heart to fibrillate, which is kind of dangerous. The rating is actually much lower. We're going to put a 0.01 capacitor here, and it's going to be a different kind. It's going to be an X2, Y2 across the line cap. And why is that important? It's important because if it gets struck by lightning or something else horrible happens, that cap will split open versus fuse together. If it fused together, then you've got a true hot chassis, and that's pretty dangerous. The most challenging thing on this set is going to be replacing all these electrolytics. I'm not going to be able to film this, but behind every single one of these lugs is a shape that's embossed and stamped into that phenolic material. There's be like usually a square, a triangle, and a half moon or something, and then sometimes unmarked. And those values, those symbols, are going to be represented. See, we have, like, what is that? Humpback, not humpback, sorry, half moon, square, and then non-marked. 120 microfarads, and then the last one is 40 microfarads at 25 volts. I don't have any 120 volt microfarads. I have 100 volt microfarad capacitors, which is going to be perfectly fine to replace. I mean, these things are, I'm going to guarantee the value of those electrolytics has drifted considerably, and yet it still works. These are not exactly fine precision instruments. You can generally throw just about anything in them, even though I try to observe the values and match them with what was in there, because you can mess up the set's sensitivity a little bit if you go hog wild and like just throw anything in it. So the only one that I'm really going to change dramatically is, again, the 2 chassis cap, strictly for safety reasons. I'm testing these capacitors, and there's, whoops, why is it doing that? They're testing surprisingly good for how long they've been in there. Yeah, it's a little high on the microfarads, but the voltage loss is only 6%. That's not bad at all. ESR's less than half an ohm. That's remarkable, really. Probably need to replace it anyway, because you have to assume this might be used for another 50 years. I'm going to start in reverse. Usually I do the electrolytics first, but I'm going to do all the paper caps because they're easier. And I'm doing that because we got up at 3 a.m. yesterday to go to an antique show, and I think we sold like, I don't know, I can't remember, 40 or 50 radios, and it was just like, it was a very intense thing. Every time we go to these shows, I never think people are going to really be interested in these radios, and they are. So I'm worn out, and I'm kind of radioed out a little bit, but I got to restart the build. Our next thing will probably be in the spring or summer, depending on how many of these suckers I can get done. So I'm going to replace this guy first. This is the all so important grounding cap, and it's going to be replaced with this guy, X2, Y2 across the line cap. And the rest of these will be replaced with like values. Like, for example, if you look on these guys, they'll have the values. I know it's hard to see, the camera's not picking it up. They're usually imprinted somewhere. Some people insist on having the schematic, but if you've already got the values written on the parts and you're just replacing like with like and the set already works, there's no need to knock yourself out with squinting your eyes over a poorly printed schematic. The only time that I personally use schematics is if I have a problem and I need to look at the schematic to figure out like how to troubleshoot, and it'll give you things like voltages for pins, for the tube pins and all that stuff. And but I think this is just going to be a basic recap. If you've recapped a radio many times, then this is going to be cake for those of you who know how to do it. Okay, so all the paper caps have been replaced, and I think in reality probably replacing those is going to take longer, or will have taken longer than replacing the electrolytics. Usually it's the other way around because you have to figure out how to reroute all this stuff. But this whole area right here is just a clump of difficult to get at spaces. And also there's a whole bunch of wires connecting to the volume control, and none of these should touch. So you just got to make sure you're real careful. Everything's secure, soldered well, are not going to touch each other. Otherwise, you'll have sparks or whatever. So now we need to replace the 3 electrolytic capacitors that are in there. There's 2 150 microfarad capacitors and one, I think I'm trying to remember, I think it was 47 or 50. Let's look. 40 microfarads at 25 volts, and that's a triangle shape. And where is the triangle shape? Let me get my flashlight out so I can see. You probably won't be able to see. Well, it's hard to tell in this, but there's goo coming out of this one, so it's obscuring the shape. That one's a half moon shape. I'm trying to think where these other guys are going. It looks like all of those attached to this one right here are going to low voltage connections. Could be wrong. I can't see what's on this one right here because there's a solder blob blocking it. We'll find out. All right, well, I was not able to uncover those shapes, so what I decided to do is, well, I know that 2 of them are the same value and they're both 150 volts rated, so I'll just measure. And I'd left my digital multimeter over at the museum, but I had my nice old Simpson here. So I was able to determine that these 2 leads are the high voltage ones and this one's the low voltage ones. So easy. We're 2 100 microfarad caps. We will replace these 2 sections with those, and it's important to note that this is the ground. It's the can that the lugs come through this phenolic plastic spacer, and that's the floating ground. Do not attach the leads of the negatives of your electrolytics to ground. It'll sound like crap, and also you're going to create an electrical hazard if you do that. Okay, so all of the electrolytics are replaced. What I've tried to do is put their grounds as close as possible to the grounding spot so that they're not going to move around. You know, we don't want like long, loose, wiggly leads. It's like, you see, those aren't going to go anywhere. Some people insist you have to have terminal strips. Well, you've got terminal strips here, so make use of them. What I'm going to do next is clean these contacts here, the pot and the wafer switch. And then I'm going to hook up the antenna and make sure the thing still works. Hope it does, because that'd be really bad if I spent all this time on it when it worked before and now it doesn't. All right, truth time. Does it work?
You need to be rescued. Rescued from the insurance companies. Our law office is a rescue for people who have been injured. We're good, President. In the first 5 days. Really? Remodeling homes is the #1 leader in home improvement financing. Call 800.
It does indeed. So the radio, as far as being a radio again, is very healthy and happy. So now that I've done that, I'm going to clean all this up. I can't stand dirty chassis for some reason, so I'm going to take it all down and take the tubes out, clean them, and take wet rags, clean all the surface of this. And then we will move on to the cabinet if time permits. This took a little bit longer than I thought. It's one of these radios I've worked on 10,000 times, but the design of it is not as easy to access. Alright, so I've got the electronics running on this guy. I'm going to let it sit for a while. So now it's time to move on to the cabinet. I'm going to use a car wax to kind of like clean this up and get it shinier than it currently is, because they were pretty shiny from the factory. And got to be careful around this horn stuff. This is very brittle plastic, and you can see it has, they usually have a crack, but I don't see one here. There's like a hairline crack here, but I'm going to use this McGuire's cleaner wax, this car wax, and apply it with some rags. Anytime I run out of underwear or like my socks get worn out, I put them out here, and I use those for wax rags. Okay, so I spent some quality time polishing this up. It's very hard to film because it's like not wonderful lighting because it's dark outside and I've got fluorescent lights going over it, and it's a light color, but I feel like that the faux wood in the front actually polished up and cleaned up pretty nicely. It's pretty attractive looking. Makes me wonder, why did RCA not make more of this? It's probably more expensive. That's my guess. Because making a Bakelite one, I guess they just figured like that weird horn thing in the front is enough to sell it. Again, they sold a crap ton of these guys. They were probably right. But anyway, this is way better looking than most of these models I've seen. Anyway, so it's now all like cleaned up. Tomorrow we will add the audio input, which it already has because it has a phonograph connection, but we need to make it safe so that there's not any potential for the user to get zapped or anything like that. I'm going to make some modifications. Anyway, I've had this on for like an hour and a half, 2 hours while I've been polishing the case, and it's perfectly happy. It's nothing happening. There's nothing like blowing up or anything, so that's very nice. Otherwise, I would have to go in and figure out what was going on. Tomorrow, I will finish this up with the audio input feature, and we'll do a final test, and hopefully this will be in the bed. See you guys tomorrow. All right, welcome to day 2 working on the RCA, and yesterday I waxed and polished the case. I know it's got some nicks and stuff in it, but you know, it's old. The next thing I'm going to do is add an audio input feature, even though there's already one here. It's got an RCA connection and a switch. So that much is done, but you really should not be running a line directly in, because even though there's a capacitor between it and ground, you want to make sure there's absolutely no chance for any current to ever get to the user. So we're going to go through an isolation transformer first. And I'm hoping that I have more of those sitting around. I think I might have thrown some in my bag here, which is a horrible mess. But we'll need to use one of those regardless. And I'll show you what that looks like as soon as assuming I can find it. Well, apparently I do. They look like this. We ordered these from Alibaba in boxes of 100. I know that's not practical for you folks, because you probably aren't stamping out radio restorations like I am, like at a factory. We do about 200, 300 sets a year. I don't even film all the radios that I restore because it takes too much time to film. And so what we want to do is the audio is going to come in through the secondary side, and then the primary side is going to go to the audio input source, which is that RCA cable. Incidentally, a lot of people don't make the connection that the reason that's called an RCA connection is because RCA patented that connection way back in the 1930s. And it's interesting, you know, it seems like every time that Apple comes out with a new iPhone or a new laptop, they change the connections. But the old RCA connection has been tried and true and has been around ever since. Probably isn't going to go away anytime soon because it's such a simple yet effective design. But before I do that, I need to fix the cord situation. The new cord is spliced onto the old one, and the old one is rock hard. It crumbles if you bend it, and I don't like that. So we're going to fix that jerry-rigged thing. It's not easy because the one side of the connection is like right there where I've marked it red. So that's going to be real fun. What I might do is just solder it via the front. I mean, who cares? It's not going to make a difference. But let me undo that wad, and I'm going to have to take this, I forget what these are called, these connections here, these cord crimps. You need a special tool to remove them, and I, of course, don't have it, so I use a jerry-rigged method, which is a screwdriver, to pop it out. Okay, done. I mean, it doesn't sneak behind the switch like that, and I'm sure there's a reason why they did it. But I've done this before, and it doesn't really seem to make a difference as far as the set performing. So now we can install this isolation transformer, and here is the input, and so we're going to probably mount the isolation transformer there. Let's see if I have it turning around that way, and one side will go to ground and the other side will go to this point right here, which is the positive side of audio. Usually I use glue, but I want to clean this up and sand it down to roughen it up a little bit on both that and the isolation transformer. Someone is cooking something really good out there. I don't know what that is, but it smells delicious. Anyway, sorry, I'm hungry, so that kind of like piqued my interest. But I'll wire this up with all the appropriate electronic tidbits, and we'll give it a try. All right, so we have our isolation transformer installed with our incoming audio. I'm going to put a little glue on there so that doesn't move around. And that goes to our input here. So now this is isolated, and I've got this on the phono selection. I need to clean that switch up a little bit, and this Bluetooth connected. Of course, that's not the speaker that's in the set. It's a much smaller speaker, but that should have some good fidelity once we install it. There's a few more things I'm going to do before I button this up. I'm going to, again, put some glue here. I also tend to put a little glue on top of this. I haven't had one of these break free, but if it ever did, I would not want it rattling around there with these exposed contacts. So I try to cover that up. So if it does break loose, nothing bad's going to happen. It's just me being OCD. And so after that, we'll put it back in the cabinet and we'll give it a test, see if it still works. All right, she is back together again. Why do I feel so sick and tired? Broadcasting from East Tennessee, WDVX.com. If you guys like Americana music or bluegrass or jazz, well, not jazz, they pick blues, all kinds of good things. Look them up, 89.9 WDVX.com, East Tennessee's own, as they say. So let's go ahead and try out the radio.
Lanes have been reopened, but both directions of the base.
So, when we were just the last commercial. Do you hear what I hear? Ringing through the sky, shepherd.
This evening out of the city.
They do that against the pup.
Believes there could be other alleged victims. Goes on review for death.
Opportunity to minister to so many of these people that might be kind of.
Anyway, it seems to be working pretty darn well. I'm gonna let it run here for maybe 2 or 3 hours at least, and if anything, it's going to thermally break down, be in the cabinet where it's going to reach its maximum operating temperature. I want it to happen now versus later. So if it lasts, I don't know, an evening or two, and it's still happily playing along, that means it's probably good to go. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching. I know that you've probably seen a million billion videos made of this model, but if not, if you're on the other side of the country, or if you're in another country, maybe it's interesting for you. I don't know. All right, guys, I'll see you next time. Adios. Bye.